And national championships. I'm Frank Robertson.
The Pentagon that the command and control structure from Baghdad to the commanders in the field has almost completely broken down. Fact number 4. Emergency medical equipment was rushed to that compound, and there is a very high degree of confidence, almost near certainty here at the Pentagon and without the larger intelligence community, that at minimum Saddam Hussein was injured, quite possibly very seriously, and it is this preponderance of evidence that leads them to draw the inference, not the declaration, no definitive statements, John, but the inference that at minimum Saddam Hussein was hurt and quite possibly killed. Now, what does the defense secretary say about it? Well, he has put all of these things together, but as yet, being very cautious, as he knows this is the most critical component of this campaign, he's willing, for now, to withhold absolute comment. Here's how he phrased it at the briefing at the Pentagon just a few hours ago.
I hear scraps of information, and you can be certain if I had a sufficient number of scraps that it began to make a persuasive case, that I would opine on it.
There you have it, John. Scraps of information. That's what they're all working on. And here's the real problem. And it's not necessarily a problem, it's just a fact problem. The people who are nearest that compound that was struck, where the intelligence community and the Defense Department believes Hussein, Uday, and Saddam all were, are not on our side, at least not yet. So the people plowing through the rubble are not exactly giving the most accurate information back to the larger U.S. and coalition community. Eventually that will happen, and then we'll all know the absolute truth. John, back to you.
You know, Major, we've got a picture of Baghdad up, and we're hearing various sounds, some firing, what sounds like air raid signals. Is there an expectation? Major Garrett will rejoin us a little bit later. As you can hear, air raid sirens in Baghdad, and I guess we should expect that the campaign of precision-guided weapons and cruise missiles will go on for a little while. Let me read you something else that we just are learning here. Terry Schultz, our Fox producer at the State Department, inquired of the State Department what kind of reactions they're getting from Arab and Muslim countries now that the assault is fully underway. And the State Department officials say they're getting the exact response they wanted, which is dead silence. No one is saying a word against it, this official said, adding that those governments are also controlling anti-war street demos and not fanning the flames of anti-Americans, as sometimes has been the case in the past. So, from Arab and Muslim nations, the response the American government would like, which was dead silence. It's early in the campaign, but not too early to ask how it's going so far. Are there any adjustments to be made on the fly, or is everything going according to plan? With some analysis, Fox military analyst, retired Major General Paul Vallely, joins me from Washington. So, Paul, I can ask you, General, excuse me, I can ask you what I was going to ask Major John. Garrett. More bombs tonight? More cruise missiles tonight?
John, I think what we have now is a lull. They're going to set back, they're going to look at the campaign plan, and then make any adjustments.
So what would be the adjustment that would seem logical or obvious to you?
Well, you know, they had a target list, so they would have hit those targets in a phase 1 operation. When they go to the second tier or the next targets, then they would look at which ones they will take out and on down the list until they're completed to their satisfaction. That is the Euphrates River going from south to north. Now, our forces, for the most part, will go to the left side of the screen or to the west as they come in and enter Baghdad.
Now,
Let's
Paul,
now go to the next Fox flyover. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, we're going to show now coming up on a presidential palace, John, much like the one that was taken out in downtown Baghdad today. And so in that regard, John, they have bunkers underneath those palaces, command and control headquarters. So if they use those big 2,000-pound bombs on those, they devastated those palaces. Let's go now to the next Fox flyover, which is going to be a communications site as we go in here. Now, Special Security Organization was headed up by Qusay, Saddam's son. That gives you a look-see at a communication site that probably was on the primary target list, John. Now, that gives you an idea of the terrain over there, what the environment is, and what it looks like to our soldiers, not only flying in helicopters, but from the aircraft and then on the ground shortly as we move towards Baghdad.
You know, Paul, there were a lot of people who thought the reason that the shock and awe went off today, not only was it scheduled, not only was it planned, but the Republican Guard did not surrender. From your experience in these matters, I know you dealt with Panama and others, what is going on right now in the negotiations to try to get those Iraqi divisions to lay down their guns?
John, about 2 hours ago, I received a call from the Middle East. There are no communications that are coming out of Baghdad, the headquarters, to the outlying Republican Guard units, as well as the Special Republican Guard, which may be outside the limits of Baghdad. Now, you remember before we had intelligence that he pulled his Special Republican Guard back in around Baghdad, but nobody's communicating with each other now. They're not picking up any traffic at all. So this indicates that that command and control structure, John, has been disintegrated to a great degree. So whatever's left in Baghdad, as we approach, we'll find out what's there based on current intelligence, and then we'll take the necessary steps to tweak the campaign plan in order to have that entire regime collapse from within. I think that's what they're working on.
All right, Paul, now very quickly, months before this started, you told us they have the cell numbers of all those generals commanding all those divisions, and they can call them and start talking to them. Am I to assume that that is going on as we speak?
Well, of course, when we put that out, John, maybe Saddam took all their cell phones away, but I doubt it. We've been talking to them. We've had their numbers. We've even been emailing them. That is part of the psychological operations campaign, John, and this is the most effective PSYOP campaign ever conducted by any army in history.
Rumsfeld told reporters the Iraqi regime is, quote, starting to lose control of their country. For the latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom now, Fox News Pentagon correspondent Brett Baird joins us now live. Brett.
Hi, Brett. Tonight, air raid sirens can be heard again in the city of Baghdad, and senior defense officials say to expect more massive airstrikes before this night is through. As battle damage assessment is continuing, the march to Baghdad continues as well. As far as who is in control of Iraq, there are still questions about that, and according to one senior defense official, quote, if any command and control is left in Baghdad, by tomorrow, they will be completely out of touch with their forces. Shortly before 9 p.m. Baghdad time, Iraq's air defenses started firing into the sky.
No explosions that I've seen inside the city.
Then the barrage began.
And a few minutes ago, the air war in Iraq began.
Very close to us. We've got to watch the windows here. I hope you can still hear me.
90 minutes of intense strikes. A host of targets hit, including 3 of Saddam Hussein's palaces, Ba'ath Party headquarters, and Republican Guard troop positions.
We did not choose this war. Saddam Hussein was given a choice by the international community. Give up your weapons of mass murder or lose power. He chose unwisely, and now he will lose both.
In the first wave, more than 1,200 bombs and missiles hit targets across the country. More than 300 Tomahawk cruise missiles fired submarines. B-2 stealth bombers dropped dozens of precision-guided bombs. Carrier-based attack aircraft struck other targets in northern Iraq, the cities of Mosul, Kirkuk, and Tikrit. In a few days, coalition troops will have surrounded Baghdad. Senior defense officials say so far, the resistance has been fairly light, but still present.
Clearly, we're moving towards our objectives, but we must not get too comfortable. We're basically on our plan and moving towards Baghdad, but there are still many unknowns out there.
One of the unknowns, the fate of Saddam Hussein. But senior defense officials can definitively say Iraq's military is losing control.
The confusion of Iraqi officials is growing. Their ability to see what is happening on the battlefield, to communicate with their forces, and to control their country is slipping away.
To the right of that column of smoke, you can see flames. Now, keep in mind, that's several miles away.
A handful of oil wells are still on fire tonight in southern Iraq. But coalition forces have secured the oil fields, and now oil fire specialists are being flown in to fight the fires. Hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have already surrendered to coalition troops. Others have simply walked away from the battlefield. This is exclusive video of last night's crash of a CH-46 transport helicopter. It's night vision video. 4 U.S. Marines and 8 British Royal Marines died in what is being described as a tragic accident. Today, 2 more U.S. Marines died while trying to secure southern Iraqi cities and targets. The giant green light there you see is the remains, what's left of that crash as it happened yesterday. Now, today's operation, we're told, went off very well, except there was one major hiccup, and that was Turkey. After the Turkish parliament approved overflight rights late today, the Turkish government took back that. They essentially reneged on that deal, saying the U.S. military could not fly over Turkey. After some what we're calling not so diplomatic talks, Turkey then allowed the overflight rights in 2 different columns over their country, and now U.S. military planes are able to fly over Turkey for further strikes. Brett?
Brett, one of the operations that General Myers described at that briefing, and by the way, that picture you're seeing on the left of your screen is the live picture of Baghdad, and we will go to that picture and other pictures of Baghdad at any moment should events warrant that. So stay tuned, folks. I was just going to say, Brett, he talked about an operation involving the waters just off southern Iraq, where there was a ship boarded, and tell us about that, Brett.
Right. U.S. and British ships confronted and intercepted 3 Iraqi vessels in the waters just off of Iraq in the southern port area. Those vessels contained mines, many mines. They managed to capture those ships and took them out. They are not a harm to the U.S. military, and those waters, we're told tonight, are clear.
Watch out. Okay, well, those are very large bombs. Those must be the 1,000-pounders, I would have thought. Much, much larger explosions than last time. Huge shock waves coming through the balcony and the open doors where I'm standing. That huge, intense barrage coming down from the skies or from cruise missiles is impossible for me to say because I don't want to expose myself out there. But it's had the same effect on the ACAC crews and the air defenses. They seem to be suppressed at the moment. Hello?
Yes, David, keep going. Can you hear me?
I think I've lost my line.
You're still with us, David.
There's a whole shroud of smoke covering all the lamps in the city at the moment. All the traffic is gone. A really intense barrage and series of explosions. Intense percussions and shockwaves rolling across the Tigris at the moment.
A slice of live television as it appeared on Sky News and on Fox News earlier in the day.
As they approach Baghdad when they eventually get here, Lester. Also, the cruise missiles kept coming for the next hour after this major scene. So as late as 10 o'clock, that was an hour after the original bombing, missiles were coming in. They were whizzing past our hotel. We could see their white shapes in the sky as they went into impact on those earlier targets along the banks of the Tigris River, Lester.
All right, Peter Arnett in Baghdad, where all is quiet right now after a tremendous attack earlier in the evening. Peter, thank you. We'll continue to check in with you at your location. Right now, let's get a little bit idea of the scope and intensity of this airstrike. For that, we go to New York. Retired U.S. Air Force Colonel John Warden, one of the architects of the Gulf War air campaign. Colonel, is this beyond anything that you had envisioned 12 years ago?
It's well beyond what the capability that we had 12 years ago, especially over Baghdad, because 12 years ago we had a limited number of F-117s and a limited number of somewhat difficult to target cruise missiles, and that was all we could put in there. But now we've got such an extraordinary array of precision bombs which can be put in so many places at the same time. It's awesome is a good word for it.
Do you think that the Iraqis thought of some of these places as not vulnerable because of the proximity perhaps to civilian areas? In other words, did they not have necessarily a grasp of how precise U.S. weapons are now?
No, actually, I think they in fact had a pretty good understanding of that. There were some interesting stories right after the Gulf War that illustrated that the Iraqis understood how careful we had been not to hit civilian targets. So I think they understood that. The problem is that if you're going to do business in the way that Saddam or anybody else is going to do business, you've got to have facilities. And if you've got facilities, then there is a way to attack them, and we've attacked them. And that primary thing, that those terror organizations, the internal security organizations, I think they've taken a pretty good plastering, and that's what keeps Saddam in power, if the guy is even still alive.
And Colonel, 12 years ago, you guys took out the lights. We noticed that the lights are still on in Baghdad, even after this tremendous bombing attack. Different aim here?
There's really I think a real debate about taking down the lights or turning off the electricity in the communications. There's one school of thought, and I'm certainly part of that, that says that by taking off the electricity in the communications, that you really shorten the war significantly and you save lives in the long run. The other one says, no, by taking down the electricity, it causes too much inconvenience for the civilians and so on, so we shouldn't do it. It's a reasonable debate, and clearly it's obvious which way who won that debate.
And we know there is this overall air tasking order of the first targets you want to hit. Tell us what happens now. Will there be a reassessment, a look at what was hit, what wasn't hit, and will they now redefine what they'll go after next?
Well, what I would suspect is that we probably have a fairly well pre-planned couple or three first days, and that those things, the majority of those targets will probably execute the way that they were laid out. But obviously that there will be some going back and looking at things that were hit today to see if they need to be hit again. But one of the fascinating things about the precision weapons is that if you send something out to hit something where you know that it is, I mean, if for practical purposes it's hit, and if you never looked again, you could make a pretty good assumption that you'd been successful.
All right, Colonel John Warden. Colonel, thank you for coming on and talking with us this evening.
Those films that were coming out of Baghdad, there's no question about it. When hundreds of cruise missiles and precision-guided munitions...
Coffee, I can tell you that. But so far, for this huge division, 20,000 soldiers, it's been smooth sailing.
David Bloom, as the Army marches toward Baghdad. We're on the quarter hour, so let's bring you up to date with the latest developments in Operation Iraqi Freedom. NBC's Fred Francis reports heavy overflights by coalition planes in northern Iraq. Earlier explosions rocked the key cities of Mosul and Kirkuk as allies dramatically stepped up their air assault against Iraqi forces. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said today the U.S. would convince Iraq to surrender one way or another.
We have been issuing through a variety of methods, communications urging the Iraqi military to surrender. And apparently what we have done thus far has not been sufficiently persuasive that they would have done that. It may very well be that with the initiation of the ground war last evening and the initiation of the air war this afternoon, that we may find people responding and surrendering.
There is give and take with the nation of Turkey tonight. Today, the U.S. has finally given overflight rights by Turkey. Now Turkey has moved some of its troops into northern Iraq, apparently to prevent an influx of Kurdish refugees. We'll continue to bring you up to date with all the headlines every 15 minutes. You can also get the very latest anytime on the web. For that, go to iraq.msnbc.com. For complete coverage, as well as the Target Iraq Interactive Library, including in-depth analysis, slideshows, and video, you'll find it all at iraq.msnbc.com. Well, the massive bombing campaign underway in Baghdad and other key cities in Iraq today. To talk about the strategy behind the targets and the campaign, I'm joined by military strategist William Arkin, live from New York. William, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Leslie.
We've heard so much of this shock and awe campaign. Strategically, what is it designed to do, and is there any signs that it's working?
Well, we really don't know very much about what it is actually achieving. We know that there has been an intense strike upon a variety of targets inside Baghdad, and the magnitude of that strike has been significant in comparison to 1991, but perhaps we should temper our euphoria by understanding that in 1991 there were very few targets that were hit in Baghdad, and the number of weapons that were used were very small, contrary to what people saw on CNN at the time. So now what we know is that U.S. and British forces are moving into Iraq, but they have largely done so against Saddam Hussein's weakest forces. The 11th Infantry Division, for instance, which was on the border with Kuwait, was one of the weakest Iraqi units and was one of the units that was the first to surrender in 1991 as well. And even the 51st Mechanized Division, which we've heard reports have surrendered en masse, was basically the only heavy unit in southern Iraq. So essentially, American and British forces are moving through unoccupied territory and haven't engaged any of the Iraqi army, and nor has the United States really had much clear evidence that it has achieved its goal. A lot of things have been destroyed in Baghdad, and certainly I think the strategy is well conceived in terms of trying to obviate the need for street-to-street fighting in that capital city, but we still are waiting to see what the end result is going to be in terms of whether there'll be a coup or whether Saddam Hussein will be killed.
With regard to the ground troops working north, where would you see, if there was going to be a big battle, where would you anticipate that would take place?
Well, since about 1996, when the United States declared a no-drive zone in the southern no-fly zone, there have been no Republican Guard forces deployed in southern Iraq. So the heaviest divisions are really congregated around Baghdad itself. I don't think then, therefore, we're going to see any significant ground engagements, if we see them at all, until U.S. forces get within about 60 miles of Baghdad itself. So we still have another day and a half or even 2 days before that could conceivably happen. I think that, again, the United States' strategy is very sound, which is to try to persuade, as Secretary Rumsfeld said, for the Iraqi military to either surrender or take things into their own hands, or for the Iraqi people to rise up against the regime. But that is based on a hope. It's based on a wish. And if it doesn't occur, those forces will eventually have to slowly inch their way towards a city of 5 million people. And at that point, I think we'll see a very different picture than we're seeing right now.
All right, William Arkin, thank you for joining us and sharing your insight with us tonight. I want to go now to one of our troops, one of our correspondents embedded with the troops. Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne Division. They're poised there along the Kuwait-Iraqi border. Dana, what's the latest with the 101st?
Well, I guess, Lester, I don't know if you can hear it or not. It's probably difficult to pick up on this small microphone. But the air traffic over Kuwait tonight of jet fighters going back and forth, almost non-stop, really. And we have been here for 2 weeks, never heard anything like this. They are coming out of the northeast from Iraq, some of them heading back to the carriers and some going back the other way with bomb loads, we would imagine from here. You can't see them, but you can certainly hear them. The other thing that we're watching, of course, is this hunt that must be underway in southern Iraq for the mobile launchers that the Iraqis have been using to fire missiles up this way. Where are they? They are very difficult to find, and they can be hidden in groves, they can be hidden in warehouses, rolled out, fired, and then taken out very, very quickly. They've been used to fire these Ababil missiles, and we know that there's a big hunt underway by special forces and regular forces to try and destroy them. The good news is that there has not been an alarm here now or a missile launched against us for about the last 6 hours. So it may be that some of the Iraqi forces have either abandoned them or they may be moving them further to the north and then try to relaunch them again. We'll have to wait and see. Lester.
All right, Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne. Thank you so much for the report there along the Kuwait-Iraqi border. Now, the question that continues in a lot of folks' mind is, where is Saddam Hussein, and are there cracks within the Iraqi leadership? Let's get more on that from NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell.
There are more indications tonight that Saddam Hussein may have survived that attack on his family compound, but was injured. Saddam shown tonight on Iraqi television, along with his most trusted aide, son Qusay. But U.S. officials tell NBC News it looks like old footage. Iraq's attempt today to prop up its leader.
They targeted the houses of his family, but they are safe.
In tonight's broadcast, Saddam does not speak. There are no date references. He appears thinner than in the video shown just 2 days ago.
The only clear evidence of his continuing to be alive is in the form of a television broadcast. There seems to be a great deal of controversy as to whether or not
This group, the Shias, would not be among them. The 101st, up on the top of your screen, why don't we, if we can, there you go, has started to move again. Ryan, I don't know if you're still able to communicate with us or not, are you?
I am, Aaron. In fact, I don't have very much time. I don't want to miss my ride. What I wanted to tell you was a little bit about the 101st and these vehicles you are seeing. The 101st Airborne is actually called the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault, and ever since the days when they jumped into Normandy from planes, ever since about Vietnam, they've specialized in moving their troops by helicopters. You don't see any helicopters here, but I would caution you to not think that you won't see any helicopters in this conflict. The 101st Airborne has more helicopters than any other division in the U.S. Army. What you're seeing now is basically armored vehicles, some 5-ton trucks, and some armored Humvees with anti-tank systems on top of them. This is how, should the 101st Airborne need to move on the ground, this is how they move. They don't have the same kind of mechanized stuff like the soldiers that Walt is with. They do not have tanks. They do not have Bradley fighting vehicles. Very much a grunt, if you will, an infantry division. Most of what these guys do is hump 100-plus pound backpacks on their backs. So that's what you can expect to see from them. A little bit about where we are. I cannot tell you a little bit about the environment. This is a very friendly setting. There are some Iraqis moving around in what look like 5-ton trucks. I'm told they are Bedouins also here. They are very friendly. They've been driving by. As they drive by the U.S. troops, they've been waving, the U.S. troops waving back. Really quite a friendly environment so far for the U.S.'s 101st Airborne. Aaron?
Ryan, terrific work. Jump in your vehicle. As you said, you don't want to miss your ride. You're on the story of a lifetime, and we don't want you to miss your ride either, because we don't want to have to explain it here. Thank you, buddy. Ryan Chilcote's with the 100. I'm going to go to Walt in a second. This is one of those questions that we ask because we suspect it comes up. If they're an airborne unit, why are they driving in the desert, General?
Well, this is actually an air assault unit. It used to be an airborne division, and we kept the name for part of the heritage we talked about last night. It's got a great, glorious heritage, but actually it's not jump qualified right now. It goes in with air assault on helicopters, and so they're repositioning on the ground. They're going to move on the ground as far as they can, use the helicopters when they need to make that combat assault in there.
Okay, so at one point they were something, and we talked, for those of you who weren't with us last night, I mean, these names, these units have rich histories in the tradition of the American military. The CAV here, the 3rd CAV, goes back 100-plus years, right?
That's exactly right.
I mean, it's a remarkable unit. Walter, if you can hear us, did you, along the way, since that opening skirmish, as you came across the border, have you taken any artillery at any point? Have you heard any artillery firing at all? Has it been just a clean, straight drive?
It has been a dirty straight drive. There has been no firing. Dirty because there were enormous clouds of dust. We've had to stop, clean the air filters on our Humvee, and of course the Army has had to clean the air filters on these tanks. It's the most choking dust we've encountered so far because the terrain through which we've traveled has just been very soft pumice, like baby talcum powder. But again, we have not seen artillery. Again, the object of the cavalry is not to engage, but to find the hostile forces which are out there arrayed against it. That's the position we find ourselves in now. The cavalry does believe that somewhere off to the north and not too far is indeed an Iraqi unit of undetermined size. And as you look out and see the direction in which the 120 millimeter guns aboard the M1A1 Abram tanks are pointed, you have a pretty good idea of where they think that the Iraqi force is. But right now we have not seen anything. There has not been a hostile engagement at this point. There is the possibility that whatever Iraqi units are out there might surrender. Of course, that would be the wish of this cavalry unit, because again, the cavalry is not there to go head-to-head. It is out there to scout and pave the way for the 3rd Infantry Division, which will follow. And again, if they have to engage, they've got more than enough firepower to engage a unit 4 times their size. So engagement isn't an issue. It's just not the goal of this unit. The goal of this unit is reconnaissance to find the fastest, safest way north to Baghdad, and that mission is being performed now. The difficulty, of course, is that the 7th Cavalry may have to fix the Iraqi detachment which is out there, and by fix it, that means hold it, engage it if necessary. Their operating rules are that if it wants to surrender, that's fine. If it shows the least bit of hostility, it will be annihilated. But again, that's not the position of this army. It's not the mission of the cavalry at this point. They're merely trying to punch forward as quickly as possible to Baghdad. Aaron?
Walter, I know we're going to lose you a little bit to one of the other CNN networks. I will tell you that the pictures you're sending back are, I don't know if you can see them, they're absolutely spectacular. When you pulled the video phone off the shelf, you got the good one, I'll tell you that. When's the last time you slept? When's the last time these guys slept?
I was talking to a soldier aboard a Bradley armored vehicle a few moments ago, and none of us has slept for over 60 hours, and no one slept in a horizontal position in at least that long. They have actually more space cramped up in the tanks than the CNN crew has in its Humvee. The reason being, we're just crammed full with electronic equipment, and I find myself sitting upright almost in a prenatal position, awake or asleep, and there isn't much sleep. So really, there's been no horizontal sleep of any sort for 60 hours, and no one's had anything to eat except a meal on the run. That being the case, I can tell you everyone's adrenaline is pumping this morning. You know, when you smell an engagement coming, a soldier, just no matter how fatigued he may be, loses all consciousness of fatigue, takes his sights. One of the most interesting sounds we've heard around here all morning is the clearing of the machine guns atop the tanks. You can hear them readying themselves for action, clearing the machine guns. You can hear that metallic clacking of the bolt sliding back. Very same thing with the M16 rifles. Of course, you don't have to clear a tank gun to do it, but this unit, the 3rd Squadron 7th Cavalry, U.S. Army, could see an engagement in the not-too-distant future. There's every bit of evidence that there is an Iraqi detachment out there. The only question is, does it want to stand and fight? And as you pointed out a short while ago, that isn't all that likely. It could happen. I probably shouldn't speculate, but the units in southern Iraq, south central Iraq, tend to be Shia units, that is to made up, composed of Shiite Muslims, and they have no great love nor loyalty to Saddam Hussein because he's butchered the Shia Muslims in the past. Saddam's greatest core of strength lies with the Sunnis. The Sunni Muslims, they are, of course, in Baghdad, and, of course, his own family up in Tikrit. Aaron?
Walter, I know that you need to do some business with CNN International, and I want to let you do that, but...
person there, and the fighting is continuing, and God willing we will destroy this column. They have another column that is going towards the Ali bin Abi Talib base, the south of Nasiriyah. They were faced with heavy fire and retreated without achieving anything. This is the position until about an hour ago, and it's not as they claim. As for their cowardly assault on the capital Baghdad last night and this morning, till dawn. And of course, they said that they launched over 300 missiles. We have calculated in a small area of Baghdad that 19 missiles fell on that particular area. At dawn, I went there and I saw parts of these missiles. 19 missiles in a very small area. Therefore, I expect tens of missiles that have been shot down by the Iraqi air defenses, and we are calculating all these missiles. This gang of villains, international villains. Yesterday, the Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and his hopeless General Myers talking about their precision bombing and how that no one should compare what's happening to the Second World War and all these meaningless allegations. This international gang of villains assaulting Baghdad with hundreds of missiles and stealth bombers. The number of the injured civilians, men, women, and children in their houses, where their houses have been hit. The number of the wounded until an hour ago, and I've been in touch with the Minister for Health. He told me that the number of the injured is 207 in hospital, in 5 different hospitals in the capital. And we invite you, we have arranged transport for you to go and visit these so-called military positions, 207 military positions. Those innocent people being called by that war colonel Rumsfeld, who claimed that he directed his missiles to military targets. We will be showing you 207 military targets at the hospital now. You're welcome, so the world through you can see that there is no cure to these gangs, but to tell the world the truth. This is a gang of villains, of outcasts, representatives of the ugly American imperialism. These are the representatives of the new wave of imperialism. They lie day and night, and they're not ashamed of anything. God willing, by showing the truth, I'm forced to call them these names because this is the least I can describe them with. They are not ordinary, decent human people. They are criminals. That's their nature. Means they're abnormal, and their conduct. This country of outlaws, the United States, prepares its politicians to become criminals. This empire of evil, the evil empire, prepares its people to become war criminals. These, the institutions in this outlaw of a country, prepares its politicians to become criminals.
The Air Force then brought in their A-10 Warthogs. Those are rather slow jets, but they prowl over the battlefield with a huge Gatling gun in the front. That Gatling gun blows everything out of the way, or almost everything out of the way. Now, the cavalry thought it could move after that, but the decision as to whether the cavalry should move at this point was bucked up to the divisional commander, General Buff Blount, and even to the Corps commander. And at that point, there was a general decision not to move these troops any further today, that is the 7th Cavalry, because of the rather unusually large Iraqi opposition that was up there. Now, this is not a setback in any sense of the word, except that there was a nuisance factor there, and they thought that this unit would be farther up the road.
Well, Rogers, we apologize. We got to break away from you. We have breaking news from Martin Savage, another one of our correspondents embedded with U.S. troops. Martin?
Well, we're now heading west with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. This is, well, here, you can see me out the window here. This is our vehicle looking through the rear view mirror at me as we move along in conjunction with the convoy of the Marine unit that we're embedded with. Take a look up just out here, Scotty, sure, the wells that we can see burning in the distance here. It's a dramatic sight. The sun's already gone down, so the flames look brighter than they do in the daytime here. Not sure exactly what well that is and where it is, but you've heard that there are a number of oil wells that were set alight in southern Iraq. This would appear to be one of them. However, only 9 of about the potential of 700. That's quite remarkable given the fact that this country could have looked like Kuwait at the end of the last Gulf War. This is the convoy that we're tied along with here. We're moving west. We don't have a destination as of yet, at least not one that's been revealed to us. Primarily, we're moving on to another area, probably to regroup, to get redirection, and then from there begin pushing off once more. This is a relatively safe area. Military units have been, U.S. military units have been passing through here all day long along this highway. It isn't just us that has been using this road. British forces as well, British tanks, British armored personnel carriers. It's amazing how much equipment, how much machinery, how many people have been pushing up from out of northern Kuwait and into Iraq, and that drive is continuing on. The eventual goal of this unit, probably most of the other units, will be Baghdad. Paula?
Martin, you had some tense moments earlier today when you encountered a rocket-propelled grenade as you were embedded with 1st Battalion. That appears to be, I believe, anti-tracer or tracer fire. We have General Don Shepard who's going to join us from CNN Center, who can much better recognize this than we can. Once again, just to give you an idea.
Artillery fire tonight, some still going out, but much less than we saw last night.
Cruise missile maybe there, no?
No, likely that is something that is part of the air defenses from the Iraqis.
Yeah, we haven't heard any air raids in Baghdad lately since we've had the shot up, but clearly some activity in the sky, and
that's an Abu Dhabi feed, and the ticker there said it was, you know, they're reporting firing, and you can see AAA going off there pretty clearly now.
So aerial bombardment has started in Baghdad for the 2nd straight night, and we could see some of what we saw last night. Go ahead.
It's interesting that the oil cloud that they lit off earlier today doesn't seem to have hung around much.
Is that the oil cloud? Do you think that's part of the oil cloud there?
No, I think that's the smoke from the damage that was done last night. That the oil smoke was much blacker and much denser. It seems to have dissipated.
Well, those look like fires burning. Might have been damage that's done just recently.
Exactly.
So this is the beginning of what we might see. Combination of cruise missiles and aircraft tonight.
Exactly.
No aircraft over during the day, from what we could tell.
And not well, and it's hard to know whether they're using how much aircraft they're going to be using at night. As General Frank said, you know, why risk a pilot when you don't need to?
Why not have aircraft dropping bombs during the day? It simply puts them at risk, right?
It does put them at risk, John, and they are as effective in delivering their precision munitions at night as they are in the daytime. So the advantage is to the United States forces in going at night, although that doesn't preclude the possibility in future days of going 24 hours around the clock with both cruise missiles and with manned aircraft.
Well, you know, in the build-up to this war, there was a great deal of talk about a 48-hour campaign, non-stop. But that's not what's happened here. There have been breaks, and especially breaks during the day.
Well, it looks like, you know, CENTCOM is being very flexible in their things. We're talking about these conversations with different people throughout the Iraqi leadership. And this is a campaign that's been going on for months and years. And if that's having some effect, pull back the military.
What are they, when you target the anti-aircraft, you don't really go after the guns, you go after the radar, right?
Exactly. That is a key knowledge node, if you will, for directing those anti-air defense systems, both surface-to-air missiles and the anti-aircraft artillery. It is likely that they have positioned those air defense units in areas that are very, very close.
Heard 4 hours ago that there might have been the beginning of daytime or right at dusk, a strike of a fuel depot. What we're seeing now is what the general describes as tracer fire, followed by anti-aircraft fire. General Shepard, for those of us or folks who were watching yesterday's time, this looks pretty similar in advance of that 7-minute barrage.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of notes on this. Tracer fire is anti-aircraft fire. Now, the lower level, when you see them low to the ground like that, is generally the lower caliber weapons. When you see them going up higher in the sky, are very tracers that last a long time. That's high caliber weapons that reach up to high altitudes. This is probably a combination of 37, 57, 85, and 100 millimeter anti-aircraft fire. These are Soviet guns that have existed since the Vietnam War and still exist. They're very, very lethal.
And what do you think they have more of, this lower caliber weapon or the higher caliber weapon?
Well, always you have more of the lower caliber weapon, but the lower caliber weapon hits things at low altitude. The aircraft and weapons attacking may or may not be at low altitude.
And we are watching this as we hear the call to evening prayer going on. General Shepard, I think a lot of people would like to know what it is that is left in downtown Baghdad to hit. The Iraqis claiming 19 different targets were hit yesterday. The Pentagon saying more than that. What is left to hit here?
A lot is left to hit in this area on the west bank of the Tigris. Let me give you a little tutorial, if you will, on that west bank. If you think of Washington, D.C., think of standing at the Pentagon and looking toward the Capitol, looking past the Lincoln Monument, up the mall to the Capitol, across to the Supreme Court. That's about the length of this area. And then think of looking left toward Georgetown. That's about the area that you're looking at, about a 2.5 square mile area, and there's lots left to hit in there, a lot of it perhaps underground. So I suspect we'll be restriking some of the targets and hitting new ones as well, Paula.
The air defenses are located, we are told, inside some highly populated areas. What kind of a challenge is that to work around?
It's a big challenge. Now, your fixed missile sites are going to be located probably in peripheral areas, not in the real populated areas, just because they're so big and complicated. The anti-aircraft guns themselves will be put on top of apartment buildings and that type of thing. Those going after the anti-aircraft will have to be very, very careful not to cause civilian casualties, and there are plans to deal with that type of thing in order. But what you want to do first is you want to put out the radar eyes, you want to put out the fixed missile sites, then you go against the mobile missile sites. Later you take care of the anti-aircraft. You may or may not do it from the air, you may do it from the ground, Paula.
All right, joining us now, Colonel Mike Turner, to add to what we're seeing on the screen. Colonel Turner, what are you looking at?
Paula. Just to add to General Shepard's comments, my backseater in F-4s transitioned into F-111s and flew over Baghdad during Desert Storm. His reports from the cockpit on one of these raids were pretty amazing. The anti-aircraft shells explode, and when they get thick enough, if you happen to fly through them in a certain way, you can actually smell the cordite, the gunpowder from the puffs of these explosions coming through the air conditioning system of the aircraft. It's a pretty intense time, and even though it's barrage fire and unguided fire, as General Shepard said, the golden BB, as we used to call it, can still do some pretty serious damage.
And how threatening is that for pilots?
Well, obviously it's very threatening. The severe threat is radar-guided munitions, whether it's AAA or surface-to-air missiles. And at this point in the air campaign, I have to believe that we've shut down most of those systems. So this is unguided barrage fire. It tends not to be very accurate, and the threshold has been reduced dramatically of the threat to the air crews as they come by. So
for the folks that are just joining us, we are looking at what General Shepard believes to be another round of nighttime bombing here in Baghdad.
We're riding with them. This is our vehicle in conjunction with a convoy heading west now, leaving Basra behind us and the main oil field objective that they captured yesterday. But speaking of oil, take a look out the window here as we travel along There, the brilliant orange plume. It seems to be a key indicator of an oil well that was set alight. There are said to be about 9 oil wells burning in this part of southern Iraq, nowhere near as bad as the projections some had made about the scorched earth policy of Saddam Hussein. And now take a look forward. This is the convoy, mostly made up of Marines of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. That vehicle right there, an AAV, an amphibious assault vehicle. This convoy is heading off west to a new objective. So far, we haven't been told what that is, but eventually the goal is going to be all the way to Baghdad. For the Marines here, these amphibious vehicles work just as well in the desert as they do in water, and they're doing just fine on the highway, a highway that is shared with a lot of military might, all moving up from northern Kuwait and farther into Iraq. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in southern Iraq.
2,000 sorties, 1,500 cruise missiles, bombs launched. We'll be keeping a very close eye on the sky. As we look now, we don't see, or at least I don't see any evidence of Iraqi anti-aircraft fire now. As we close out the hour, the momentum...
Iraqi soldiers that might be in hiding right now. The moment they find armor, the moment they find any tanks, they're blowing it up. And that's exactly what is taking place in the background here. Whoa! I think my foresight's off. All right. Yeah, that was a tow missile. Fired in the general area where you saw that tank before that was being blown up. Obviously, they're seeing stuff down there they're not too happy about. Not taking any chances. The tow missile is a very heavy weapon. They throw the tube off the top. They'll get ready to reload again. They'll try to move positions too. We're not exactly sure what they're seeing up there at this point. I mean, obviously, we're still trying to keep our heads up around ourselves. At the same time, the demolition crews are preparing the other tanks, and we'll try to bring that to you. They seem to be concerned about, obviously, the village itself. Not that there is obvious reason to be suspect. It's just that that's an area of population. You keep an eye on that. You want to make sure that any Iraqi soldiers, anyone that might want to do the U.S. military harm, is not using the village as shelter, as cover, a place where they can easily melt their way into. So that's their concern there. Well, there you go. It's getting hot. Let's go. That looks like the armored personnel carrier. We're going to keep moving back because these also have ammunition inside of them. There goes your tank down the end. And the secondary explosions that are about to follow. You're all right, Gerard. Keep coming back. Let's pull back. So the concern, obviously, that RPG is it came from the village, and now who fired it? And do they have another one, obviously? Which is why we're not going to linger too much longer. But there are more tanks to go, so if you miss that one, there'll be another one soon enough.
Talk, safety pin completely released. Check. See.
It's just Saddam's hardware being taken apart piece by piece, and that is something the U.S. military wants to do and did extensively after the Gulf War.
That was Martin Savage showing a great calm under duress. In an earlier report,
now they do, then they could just rally and demonstrate and have speakers on a platform, but now they can march through the streets. As I said, no exact crowd estimates, but they're saying tens of thousands of people. Same group that staged a protest every day this week, and on Thursday there was some conflict in Times Square. About 5,000 people showed up blocking traffic during rush hour, many of them being taken down right on the street and subdued with plastic restraints, taken to police headquarters and then charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. A big concern has been the Academy Awards, which will happen tomorrow night in Los Angeles. We spoke to actor Roy Schneider.
Of the smoke. So we really don't know exactly what was burning. We assume it was the oil wells, and we saw those helicopters firing missiles and their heavy machine guns.
Did there appear to be any return fire coming from Iraqi positions?
Not from what we could hear from our position. We were about 10 kilometers away from the actual target on the ground.
And have you seen any of the burning oil wells, or you just simply saw the smoke?
No, we could only see the smoke, but it was really incredible. I mean, it just really stretched across the entire horizon. We counted about 7 or 8 plumes. It was hard to count them all because they actually kind of came in together at certain points. You couldn't tell what were separate plumes or not.
There's nothing more chaotic than a battlefield. As you move around, is there a sense of where the friendlies are and where the enemy is?
Absolutely not. And, towns that we think are already under, in the hands of the coalition forces, we get there and see that there's actually no forces there. They've actually swept through and gone on to a new location. We've been hearing a lot of reports that Iraqi soldiers had taken off their uniforms and they were just mingling in with the population. So, people don't know who's who in certain cases. It's really a bit dicey moving around.
And as you have encountered civilians, have they reacted to you in any way?
Some are friendly, some wave and say hello, and it's quickly followed by give us water, give us to your telephone, we want to make a telephone call, give us food. And it's a certain bit of hostility. There's a certain bit of edge to it. And it seemed to me that there are a lot of journalists driving around with a lot of food and water and things in their cars, and a lot of very poor people here. And one person said, the Americans promised us aid. Where is it?
And Keith, besides the Cobras, have you seen any American fighters or warplanes hitting any positions in the area?
I haven't seen that, but I'm just here at the Safwan now, where we've retreated to after being near Basra, and we can hear heavy artillery fire.
Just lost his signal, but that's Keith Richburg giving us from the Washington Post, giving us a sense of what's happening on the ground now in southern Iraq. Apparently a fairly good pounding that the U.S. Marines delivering to positions on the outskirts of Basra. We'll continue to check in with correspondents on that situation. I want to turn right now to the situation in the northern Iraq, a situation that may be getting complicated by the hour with regard to Turkey, the Kurdish population, and what the U.S. may have to do or may be called upon to do to separate them. David Phillips is with the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also an NBC News analyst and joins us from New York. David, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Lester.
What is your sense as to where all this could go in the north?
If the Turks decide to project force across the border, Iraqi Kurds have said they would fight them. That could be a catalyst for a spiral of violence that would involve U.S. forces. The situation could easily get out of control.
Do you think, we now know the 4th Infantry Division has abandoned essentially any efforts to get ground troops into Turkey and move in. What is the next option for U.S. forces, in your opinion, to separate these sides?
There have been Turkish troops on the Iraqi side of the border for several years. It's important that the Turks restrain themselves and not try to deploy forces to Kirkuk or Mosul.
Mike Tobin is live in Central Command in Qatar. Mike.
Well, Derry, despite all the rapid advancements of the troops that have entered Iraq, really from the north, the west, and the massive force that you have coming up from the south, the harsh realities of war are not being lost on the top brass here. As a matter of fact, 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in an RPG attack right about the time that General Franks was giving his briefing. He talked to that subject, of course, not specifically about this attack, but the fact that they are here at CENTCOM well aware that U.S. soldiers are in harm's way.
Who's got some new information for us? Major.
Yes, indeed, Dari. I have some information, and it is very good information, and it corrects what Fox News has been reporting for a while, and other sources have been. We said that there were 4 dead members of the United States Army attached to the 3rd Infantry Division. They are not dead. They are wounded. That has been confirmed throughout the 3rd Infantry Division. What happened in this case is there was an embedded journalist, Colin Brazier with Sky News, a colleague, a sister network of Fox's, who was embedded with this particular element of the 3rd Infantry Division. He saw 2 rocket-propelled grenades hit 2 separate Humvees, each containing 2 Army personnel attached to the 3rd Infantry Division. By what he saw, it was clear to him that they were killed. That, in fact, is not the case. They are wounded, not dead. I said mere moments ago, because we had been told here at the Pentagon, trust what your embedded reporters tell you. If that's what they saw on the scene, that's what you should go with. There has now been a thorough investigation throughout the 3rd Infantry Division. These 4 members of the United States Army, wounded, not killed in action, wounded, and are being dealt with by the 3rd Infantry Division as it continues to make its advance from southern Iraq, northern toward Baghdad. This is a case where an embedded reporter thought he saw what he saw, communicated it. In fact, what he saw wasn't exactly what was the case. It's been thoroughly investigated by the 3rd Infantry Division, and I'm glad to report these 4 soldiers wounded, not dead. Back to you in New York.
Well, that is certainly the kind of news we like to hear. Thank you, Major.
All right, Greg Palcott is live in Amman, Jordan. Greg.
This report.
We passed more than a dozen oil fires as we traveled north, further into Iraq, driving under and next to towers of flames several stories high. And we saw hundreds of camels, one young one by himself, others in large packs. Meanwhile, our pack moves slowly because of trouble ahead and more than one flat tire. There are guard posts built on highway overpasses, but all of them appeared empty. And we saw farmhouses and men dressed like farmers. But the Marines suspect some of these guys are soldiers who changed clothes to avoid capture. Marines are staging again at yet another assembly area, digging fighting positions and checking their gear. But no one expects to stay here very long. In Iraq, Rick Leventhal, Fox News.
Other than that, the information on this subject is just coming into Central Command at this point, and you have the press group here who work in the back office and help the media out with information, scrambling to get more, but really their information is limited. As you know, big sections of the 101st Airborne Division have already moved into Iraq. There is not a whole lot of information as far as which divisions are still back in Kuwait at Camp Pennsylvania, where this attack occurred.
All right, thank you, Mike Tobin. Thanks so much. Joining me now, it's sort of a poignant and appropriate time to talk about this. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Lackey. Colonel Lackey, actually, he's a full colonel, not a lieutenant colonel. Colonel Lackey, we have just heard a story about some of our soldiers being injured in battle at the very beginning of, or not even in battle, but being injured by people who are supposed to be part of the team. I want to talk to you about something that I teased at the beginning of the show, which is we are likely to see in the coming days the use of the most devastating weapon in, well, world history, and that is the American soldier. Britt Hume on Fox News Sunday about a week ago said that maybe the person of the century for the 20th century should have been the American soldier, and he provided eloquent reasons for that. But rather than reciting his soliloquy, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it. You served in Desert Storm. You were a guy who briefed Norman Schwarzkopf. You have been there in the trenches. You're somebody who feels very deeply about the quality of our servicemen and women. Let's talk a little bit about the people whose stories we're going to be seeing. Colonel?
Yeah, the most devastating weapon on this modern battlefield is the American soldier, in my view. I watched him in Vietnam. I watched him in the rebuilding after Vietnam. I watched him in Desert Storm. There is not enough you can say about why we have the greatest army in the world, except to say that our soldiers are simply different.
Elements of them, at least, attacked at Camp Pennsylvania inside Kuwait by a number of individuals with grenades. There was a small arms fire exchange, 10 wounded, 6 said to be seriously. We're efforting more details, and we will bring them as we get them. As American troops push further into Iraq, meantime, journalists are chronicling their progress from the front lines. NBC's Chip Reed is traveling with the 1st Marine Division. He filed this report earlier today during his travels.
Well, we just saw an extraordinary spectacle coming from southeastern Iraq, where the oil fields are that the U.S. Marines were traveling with, secured yesterday. On the way to this place, somewhere in south-central Iraq, we've moved in a northwesterly direction, but that's all we can tell you about our location. But along the way, we passed through some real poverty-stricken, hard-scrabble villages where it seemed like everybody who lived there was out there waving hello and giving the thumbs up and the victory sign and blowing kisses to the American Marines as they passed through. But it is a lesson in how difficult it is to both wage war against a country, a government, while embracing the people of that country at the same time. That while the Marines were waving back at these people, they had their rifles trained on them because of the danger that there's always the possibility that somebody could come out of that crowd with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher or a rifle and fire at them. So they are really on a hair trigger, but at the same time, they're trying to embrace the people of this country. On another interesting note, so far in the military confrontations they've had, there was really one major one in particular where they secured a very large oil plant to keep the Iraqi army from blowing it up. The Iraqi army has no interest in fighting. They were very heavily armed. They found out later they found large caches of weapons in mud huts and underground forts, but none of them fought. All of them surrendered quite easily. And I talked to the lieutenant colonel of this battalion a short time ago about that. Here's what he said.
It is a delicate balance, so that what we try and do is be courteous but be firm with them. And I think just being cautious as we go through this is probably the best way to handle these situations.
Lieutenant Colonel Mundy fully expects, though, as they head farther north and they run into the Republican Guard as we get closer and closer to Baghdad. They're not telling us we're going to Baghdad, but that is the general direction we're heading at this point. But as they head more in a northwesterly direction, it is expected that there will be more resistance and things will become more dangerous. Back to you.
All right, and we're getting a bit more on that attack on members of the 101st Airborne Division inside their camp at Kuwait. It was small arms fire apparently happened at the rear of their base camp when they were attacked with grenades and small arms. There was an exchange of fire. 10 wounded, 6 seriously. They were taken to a field hospital, and the attack was the 4th against Americans in Kuwait since October, but this is the first time that U.S. forces have been penetrated in Kuwait since the war began, and there's no indication on how many, but they threw 2 hand grenades into a tent is now the word we're getting. 10 people wounded, 6 of them seriously, and we don't have any more specific information on the extent of the injuries beyond seriously or the particular unit. The 101st Airborne Division is a vast unit. It has been deploying over there now for weeks. Some of the units, as we heard from David Schuster, have actually moved into Iraq, but the bulk of them are still inside Kuwait, awaiting their start of their missions inside Iraq, and the military, again, not identifying the unit of the 101st. Dana Lewis, I'm told we now have him. Dana Lewis is our correspondent with the 101st Division. What do you hear?
What we are hearing is that this took place at a camp known as Camp Pennsylvania, just down the road from where I am. In fact, I was in that camp 2 days ago, and I can tell you that security there has been very tight. But despite that, a spokesman out of Fort Campbell, George Heath, is saying that there was some sort of infiltration into the camp by so-called terrorists who threw 2 grenades into a tent, and they have 10 injured, perhaps 6 seriously. Here at this camp, we've heard that they were calling for medevacs, more than one, to airlift the wounded out. Certainly we know that each medevac carries 4 litters, so if you're calling for more than one, that would confirm that there are at least more than 4 wounded. I can tell you at this camp where I am, security has been absolutely tightened up over the last, I'd say, 3 days. Barbed wire strung across the camp. Suddenly, parts of the camp that we used to walk into, you can't pass through anymore without giving passwords to go into certain areas. A lot of concern by all of the leadership that there could be infiltrations from Iraq, and that somebody might try to attack American forces staging here in Kuwait, getting ready to move into Iraq. And that's exactly what those troops were doing in Camp Pennsylvania. We knew that they were supposed to move out very soon to head to Iraq. They had uploaded some live ammunition with them, and at this point, we can't give you any more detail than that, but it seems that there has been some sort of attack inside that camp just down the road from us.
And I recognize this is all breaking now, but what reaction are you getting from the soldiers you're with?
I can tell you that just outside a command center that is across from our tent where we sleep, they have just posted a special guard right now. So obviously there's a lot of concern that this has happened so close to us, so close to a neighboring brigade of the 101st. And, you know, I think that they are all waiting to see what happened. I think that they're amazed that somebody was able to get into that camp. It is guarded very closely. There are very high sand berms all around those camps, barbed wire. You can't go in and out of the camp without having very good identification, without being searched. Even our cars, when we go in, and we have good media accreditation. Usually we have Army escorts when we drive in. The cars are searched. They search under the cars. They don't check our person, but they obviously know where we're from, and we have good ID. But any of the foreigners, like the local hires, for instance, from Kuwait that are going in there, we've seen them. They all get patted down, searched physically before they enter those camps. So, I mean, this is it. You can't say certainly that their security isn't very tight, but somehow it appears in the initial stages, or the initial reports from that camp, it appears that somebody did indeed get inside and throw several grenades into a tent.
Has that been a source of personal anxiety for troops?
Just a word or two from you about securing these rear echelon bases. General Clark, you want to go first?
Well, it is doctrinal. We secure these bases. We have, in this base, I think, a full infantry company there doing this security mission. I'm sure there's checkpoints where all the civilian workers who come in are, to some degree, searched. They're cleared. We probably have photograph ID cards, but we probably don't have full background checks. And, of course, given the transitory nature of that operation, it's impossible to know everything about everybody who's in that camp. So this is the kind of incident we've been concerned about, and it happened.
General Grange, almost unavoidable, because at a certain point you have to make use of locals in order to do what the Army does, right?
Well, here's what you have. Well, the bases will be secure. A lot of discussion today when you bypass enemy forces that do not become prisoners of war, when you bypass built-up areas. Who secures these roads? Who secures this rear area? And actually, forces are assigned to do that. But you have to take a little bit of risk. You can't secure every square foot of ground all the way up to Baghdad. So you have to use mobility, use air and ground security forces to support you in that regard, and you got to keep moving.
Can that come to bite you on the back fender?
It can. I mean, again, it's a risk that you take, but there are assigned forces to cover the rear areas as you move forward.
General Clark?
That's exactly right. It is a matter of sort of where do you economize on your forces. But in the case of this incident in Kuwait, this is an area we knew was a sensitive area. It is doctrinal that we would have it secured, but the question is, how much can you secure it with? How much of your force can you pull offline and put back in a rear area for security? And, you know, we'll do a complete after-action review on this, and if we have to change the procedures, we will.
It's airport screening for these camps. I mean, that doesn't sound like a practical thing, does it, General Grange? Or General Clark, go ahead.
It isn't a practical thing, and so you make compromises. But now that we know what the risks are, as unfortunately we've learned in this case, obviously the United States Army will have to do better.
General Grange, anything they should do to look at security here?
Well, you can bet they'll look at security and they'll take that into consideration. I just can't imagine this unit not having good security. So we'll find out once, we'll give them a chance to see what happened here, and then they'll take the appropriate actions.
David Grange, Wesley Clark, both of them retired generals, United States Army. Thanks both for being with us.
Quote from a reporter now, the clashes have been going on for about 2 hours. This according to Luke Baker, who is one of those embedded reporters with the United States military. And this filed from him just about 5 minutes ago, saying he was about 2 to 3 kilometers, or about 1.5 miles, behind the head column where the fighting was taking place. There have been engagements with Iraqi forces for the better part of the past 2 hours, according to this reporter. And there you see it. Nice work, guys. That Najaf, just south, right along the Euphrates River. That's the Euphrates on the left and the Tigris on the right. And Najaf sits directly on the Euphrates. And if you keep going up the Euphrates, you'll eventually get to that Saddam Hussein palace as it intersects with the Tigris up there, which was blown to smithereens just yesterday. At any rate, this reporter, Baker, is traveling with the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. Quoting here, U.S. officers say the tanks and armored infantry up ahead are involved in what they call small-scale enemy contact. Adding here, and again quoting, I've seen a couple of what look like muzzle flashes from tanks, but no incoming shells. About 2 hours earlier, Iraqi television quoted the ruling Ba'ath Party as saying that Iraqi troops had clashed with U.S. soldiers near this city of about 420,000 people and an important religious center for Iraq's Shiite majority, which lies about 160 kilometers or 100 miles south of Baghdad. So as we get further dispatches from that city, we'll bring those to you. And in the meantime, Brett Baer, we got a report just about 40 minutes ago that the B-52s had just taken off from their post in England 5.5 hours later. Is that about the time frame when that could mean something?
Well, and actually from Fairford RAF, there it would take them about 8 hours to get into position to be able to fire cruise missiles, and that would be happening as they did on the first night of the shock and awe campaign, as we've all called it, the first wave of attacks. Fairford, there you take a live look at the B-52s. They were used extensively in that first attack, and we've been told by defense officials that the strike package would continue to contain essentially all of the strike aircraft in the U.S. military arsenal as this rolling campaign continues. They say targets of opportunity will pop up as far as troops they are seeing moving, and some key things were mentioned today. 6 special Republican Guard troops and Iraqi Republican Guard troops in and around Baghdad are significant targets. You're looking at tape here of B-52 bombers taking off there from the UK, and we can tell you that these strikes will continue. We may not see them on our live pictures inside Baghdad because some of these strikes are happening on the outer edges. We can also report to you tonight that the ground attack is continuing at the same time with a lot of combat air patrols over top, combat support from carrier-based attack aircraft, essentially providing support to any of those troops who may get into some of these battles that we're hearing about. And if they call in the strikes, those aircraft come quickly and take out the enemy.
Brett, I've been reading with great interest dispatches from reporters with many different news organizations who are traveling with the forward progress, if you will, and it sounds as if this air support is coming for troops which are fighting against this Nebuchadnezzar. Is it infantry division, a Nebuchadnezzar battalion, Brett?
Right, yeah, it's a special Republican Guard unit. It's an infantry division, and there are actually 2 of those up as you get closer to Baghdad, 2 of them that are significant in what U.S. military planners have been looking at. They expect more resistance as they go forward here, but they're saying so far the resistance, any engagement that has happened has been put down fairly easily. Now, of course, we're going to be hearing these reports, and they're telling us repeatedly to rely on the reporters on the ground and their descriptions of the battles as we move forward.
Yeah, and back to the B-52s, I think we still have some live pictures, Brett. These are the workhorse of the United States military and have been for many decades. Heavy 8-engine strategic bomber. It can go 650 miles an hour and fly over 50,000 feet, and that's a key because there's no way that ACAC, as the British call it, or the AAA, is going to affect that. They can...
Right about here, where do we know about where this heavy cavalry unit is right now, General?
Well, it's been released that they're somewhere up near Nasiriyah,
which is right about there.
And we believe that they have secured, one of the elements of that division has secured the bridge over the Euphrates River there. Now, where they go from there, of course, is speculative. We don't have any knowledge of the plans, but it is about halfway to Baghdad, and they're clearly putting pressure on the Iraqi defensive elements there.
All right, now let's move a little bit further over to the left here. We'll give you a sense of an airborne unit, the 101st Airborne specifically. You could give us a sense of where we think they may be.
Well, what we know of the 101st Airborne right now is that at least one brigade has been moving in trucks and in Humvees up probably to the west flank of the 3rd Infantry Division, probably moving up toward those captured air bases at H2 and H3.
That would put them right up in there, right? And then
probably not there yet. But
they're not there yet, but where would they go from there? Probably straight into the north and straight to Baghdad?
Probably would be the force in the north. There's got to be a way to get that northern element in there, and as you know, the 4th Infantry Division has been officially pulled off the mission of going through Turkey to come in from the north.
All right, let's move the map down now to Nasiriyah, because you were telling me some interesting things about armor doctrine. In other words, the rules of engagement, according to the U.S. Army, on how you move armor in this case, what you do when you come to a river and how you deal with bridges. Give us a sense of what happened on the ground here, General.
Well, we know that there was some resistance from the Iraqis there, that the forces that we put on the ground did not do a tank charge or World War II style infantry assault to try to overrun the Iraqi forces. Instead, using our superior firepower and communications, we put artillery fire on, and when that didn't loosen them up, we brought in A-10s, and we've heard already today from some of the A-10 pilots who flew that mission. And they were successful in breaking the resistance, and apparently we've moved at least some elements of the 3rd Infantry Division across the Euphrates. Now, we don't know whether the whole division will go across or whether the division will split and go up on both sides of the Euphrates, but at some point, to get to Baghdad, you got to get across the Euphrates.
So it's possible you might have tanks going up both sides of that riverbank. What's the reason behind all that?
You might, because you might get greater depth. On the other hand, you could also make the argument in classic military strategy, never allow a river to split your avenue of approach. So it can be played either way, and we just don't know, and that's the commander's call.
All right, one final point before we get away. There is a report we're trying to chase down that there may have been a skirmish as close as 95 miles from Baghdad in a place called Najaf. We're trying to get you some more information on that. That's Najaf. That would put U.S. forces a lot closer. General Clark, just briefly, that seems like rapid advance.
It does, but again, this is open terrain, and if there's no resistance from the enemy, there's nothing to stop you from moving at 20, 25 miles an hour. It's the enemy that determines the pace of advance, so it's very possible that this 3rd Infantry Division or some other force has raced north after seizing the crossing site at Nasiriyah and encountered the next speed bump, that Iraqi force at Najaf.
All right, the big picture from a man who knows how to synthesize it, put the pieces together for you. We still got a puzzle left, Aaron, but we're working on it.
Well, and as the general reminds me often, this is the easy part, the relatively easy part. Getting from the border to this point, it gets a lot nastier, or might, in the days ahead. Wolf?
There's no doubt this is a breathtaking story, Aaron. The developments simply are coming in, not necessarily by the hour, almost by the minute. Let's go to CNN's Carl Penhall. He's in northern Kuwait right now with yet another dramatic development. Carl?
Yes, Wolf, just a few moments ago, the all clear was sounded. That was following an attack by an Iraqi missile on one of the U.S. base camps here, close to the border with Iraq, but on the Kuwaiti side. I heard, I was asleep at the time, but we were awoken in the tent where I'm sleeping by the blast of 2 Patriot missiles as they went up into the atmosphere, U.S. Patriot missiles that went into the atmosphere to intercept an incoming Iraqi missile. Commanders here at the base have told me that that Iraqi missile was successfully destroyed in the atmosphere, and following an alert, a chemical alert that lasted some 40 or 50 minutes, the all clear has sounded and there has been no detection of any chemicals present. Commanders haven't been able to say yet what type of missile it was. First indications were that it may have been a Scud. They're now revising that and trying to analyze what kind of missile it may have been. But certainly, Wolf, that missile didn't impact the ground. It was successfully intercepted by the Patriot missiles. Wolf.
Carl, there have been a few other missiles that have come into Kuwait, successfully intercepted by this new generation of Patriot air defense missiles earlier within the past 48 hours. But the 40 minutes that you were waiting to get the all clear, was everybody in their full chemical and biological protective gear?
No, Wolf, because we're underneath tents, because we're underneath canvas, there was no need to put on the so-called MOP suits, the biological chemical suits that are packed with charcoal. Those are primarily for use when one is out in the open. The first order is to get under cover. Since I myself and most of the American troops here were asleep at the time, there was no need to get under cover. We were simply woken by the sound of the Patriot missiles, put on the masks, and waited there. And as you correctly say, yes, there have been previous Iraqi missile attacks in this region of northern Kuwait, but my recollection is that the last of those was before the start of the ground war, before American troops crossed the berm into Iraq. And I think the fact that Iraqi missiles are still coming in now is not taking anybody by surprise. Obviously, the Patriot missiles were on standby, but has left some of the commanders here scratching their heads, trying to figure out what kind of range these Iraqi missiles are and from what position they may have been fired, considering American forces are so far into Iraq now. Wolf.
Carl Penhall, we were showing our viewers some details, some graphics showing the Scud missile. Unclear at this point whether or not that was a Scud missile. They're continuing to investigate. The Iraqis have other kinds of missiles still in their arsenal, including, as all of our viewers remember, those El Samud 2 missiles, half of the arsenal was destroyed by UN inspectors, but others presumably were not. We'll continue to follow that story, and we're going to get back to Carl when he gets some more information. We're going to take a quick break, but up next, the road to the Final Four in full swing. But is March Madness taking on a different meaning this year? Stay with us.
There was biological life there, but it never made another report. That's the only evidence so far. The later on landers will search for life. They will be outfitted to search for the traces of life, and hopefully they'll be able to send back rock samples and all from Mars to see if there's any trace of it today, if what was there was only millions of years ago and is buried in rocks like in the meteorite. So all of that has to come later. This is the first step. And they will be looking for signs of water, the chemical makeup of the soil and the rocks, and photographs of the rocks and around. Oh, look at this, John, coming in. There is a first landscape picture. Now, this looks a lot like Viking, John. We got these type of pictures coming back, that same rough terrain. And there are even bigger rocks right there. And the thing about it is that they were so lucky that the Pathfinder sat down on the Martian surface without any large rocks or pebbles underneath. It's sitting flat. It only has a 2.5 degree tilt. They're very, very lucky with what they've got here, and it looks like that they are in this rich place of science in this riverbed that they're going to be able to determine a lot. Oh, look at that one now. Take a look at that, John. There is a rock over there that is larger than a car that they're looking at.
A Martian rock of enormous size. Lucy McFadden, your impressions of what you're seeing and what Jay has been discussing.
I can't see them very well. I'm
what about
speechless.
life on
Jeff,
Mars, Lucy?
Jeff, tell us, you can see them, you're reacting.
They are magnificent. We are seeing hills in the distant horizon. We are seeing boulders that are the size of cars and buses. It's just incredible. We are seeing this incredible landscape. They showed one earlier where there's a nice smooth patch of ground with a lot of fine-grained material in it. This is so much, I mean, to me, just in this initial look, this is so much more of a varied landscape than what the Vikings saw. Look at that one.
Look at that one, Jeff.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
These rocks are just, they're huge. And somehow this spacecraft has managed to land smack dab among them and come up upright the first time. This is just incredible. Absolutely incredible. One thing that I should probably correct you on, Jay, is the Vikings did have 4 experiments on board that were designed to determine the presence of biological activity. The one experiment that you talk about that returned a positive result, actually on later analysis, it turned out that they were looking at a soil component, a highly oxidizing environment on the soil that was giving kind of a false reading. It was not an indication of any biological activity. It was an unexpected component of the Martian soil chemistry, which is, after all, the spirit of discovery. You always run into things that you don't understand. The first, oh, look at that one.
Oh, it's tremendous.
That is just incredible. Absolutely amazing. I mean, this in and of itself is worth the price of admission, just seeing these pictures right here. This is amazing.
What the scientists are hoping to characterize here is evidence of an area that has been eroded by large volumes of water in a short period of time. So they're going to be analyzing what those large rocks actually mean.
Lucy, can I ask you, we're talking about, big cheer went up for one just there. Are we looking at a wheel?
I can't. They're cheering the fact that the Pathfinder's and the lander's in great shape. It's what they expected here. That's what they're cheering here now, that everything is in good shape.
Lucy, what I wanted to ask you is, you mentioned they're looking for evidence of water having passed through the area in some ancient time. Do you mean water or liquid?
Oh, no, I mean liquid water. The features, the shape of the features had to have been formed by large volumes of liquid water flowing, but a very, very long time ago, probably 3.5 billion years or longer ago.
But you're talking about H2O water, the water we know and love?
Yes, I am, sir. Yes, indeed.
So what is the theory about where it went?
Well, again, this was back at the beginning of the formation, or very soon after the formation of Mars, and it doesn't have much mass, and there wasn't enough gravity to hold the water there, so it evaporated and has escaped from Mars. That's where most of it is gone. We also believe that there is probably a component of it that is trapped beneath the surface, trapped below the surface where the dust and rocks are insulating it from evaporating. So some of it's gone up and some of it's gone down.
I forgot to talk. Yes, it's ready.
These pictures, Jay, are not only showing us Mars, but they're showing us the space probe itself.
Go ahead.
Yes, this is what they've been cheering about, John, is the fact that the lander is still in great shape, and it's just been a wonderful day for them. And if I may, as Jeff was talking about a while ago, correcting the fact that what happened they discovered on the mission with Viking on the biological sample. Our book out just this week called Destination Mars that I've got here, we've been talking about on MSNBC. Jeff, Dr. Gerald Soffman wrote a whole chapter in this book about that experiment of where they received that and what happened later and all on Viking, and all of it is in here, and thank you for correcting me because I didn't remember the part that you just told me about. And also in here, I got to tell you, Jeff, is A$AP Hall's 26-inch reflector telescope that he discovered the 2 moons around Mars, and we have those pictures in here from those discoveries by A$AP Hall. You being there at the Naval Observatory, and you're looking through that telescope now. You mentioned that a while ago. I just wanted to tell you. And now I want to get back to these pictures, John, because they are fantastic.
They are tremendous. We want to let everybody take a look at them as best we can and try to tell people what we're seeing. When they get a little murky, maybe somebody can offer an explanation.
Well, we're looking at a bag here, obviously. It's one of the bags, but just before, as I was talking, they had some tremendous pictures up there. But they've taken a complete survey around, a panorama of the whole lander there, and I just can't wait, John, to see them in color in more detail. It's going to be fantastic looking at what they got to look at. There's another great picture right there. Jeff, what do you see there?
I'm seeing a lot. Well, that one was pretty fast, but what we're seeing again is just rocks of all shapes and sizes. They have different gradations of gray on them. We're probably seeing exactly what they expected, which is rock species of many different types that have been washed down by these ancient floods a long time ago.
It also looks like...
I've got to interrupt everybody and thank you all. Lucy McFadden from the University of Maryland, Jeff Chester from the Naval Observatory, and of course Jay Barbary down at the Cape. As always, we are looking at the first pictures from Mars, the first color pictures from Mars. The first color pictures of Mars should be coming in during the news with Brian Williams in about an hour. We're not going to leave this now, not just yet. If necessary, we'll join Internight in Progress, but let's keep looking. What was that one?
That looked like a shot of the sky.
Yeah, it looked like a true landscape and skyscape of Mars. Jay, are you still with me there?
No, I'm here with you. I was waiting for Jeff to say, because this is more Jeff's expertise than mine, and I'd like to hear a little more of his analysis in here, John. And I was waiting for him, but I'm looking at it. Looks like, you know, so the airbags again here. Is that what they are?
That's an airbag again.
Well, I want to go out and pick those up and get them out of the way.
Okay,
Jeff,
Lucy, we'll send you up.
Jeff, when we see something like that, we've seen that one before, but
well,
tell us what you observed.
I'm no geologist, but you know, what is amazing here is, again, we have what appear to be rocks of two different colors. There's some rocks where we seem to be seeing pores that might be indicative of a volcanic origin. There's others where this one here looks like it's got cracks in it.
Look at that sky, Jeff.
Oh, look at that. And there's a big hill out there in the distance. What a beautiful day on the planet Mars. This is just incredible. I mean, it's almost
a report from the planet Mars, courtesy Jeff Chester of the U.S. Naval Observatory. They are
we're back here on these rocks again, and now we're seeing that flat part that we saw a little bit earlier. And these are rocks that are quite light in color.
I can't wait to see the color for that reason, Jeff. You got the light ones, and then you got the darker ones over here. And
I can't wait to see the color pictures of the sky. That's going to be, you know, when the Vikings were there was a lot of dust in the air, and the sky was very kind of a salmon pink color. One of the things that they've done is they've used the Hubble Space Telescope to actually take weather pictures of Mars while they were on the way. And the weather forecast as of yesterday was that they were going to touch down and maybe see a nice blue sky. Now here's an area where we're seeing some what look like very large boulders that are probably three-quarters buried in the sand. This
you know
is
I think I'd like to make a prediction. It looks like, I'm surprised to see so many rocks strewn around, and I would wager that we have landed in that area that Matt Golombek was talking about earlier that is full of secondary craters. I think these rocks have been put there from ejecta from craters. And this was one of the possible areas that he was talking about earlier that we might have landed in. But of course we have to wait and look around and assess the situation and as well as get some radio reception.
Lucy, would you explain what is a secondary crater?
A secondary crater is, let's see, when you have a primary crater, you have an impact from a large incoming body that collided with the surface of Mars, and that threw out material from that impact, and that material landed further away from the primary impact site and then was ejected again. So a secondary crater is formed from fallback from the impact of a large meteorite or a meteoroid that has hit the surface of Mars.
And Lucy, is the area where the Pathfinder landed, is that what we would call a lake bed here on Earth?
Well, now, let me remind you, I was speculating, but they chose that area on Aris Vallis to be an area that had been swept away by large volumes of water. There are regions in that area that are flat and smooth like a lake bed, but there's also in the map that I saw earlier a region of cratered terrain. And I'm seeing these blocks of rock, and if water flowed through there, they would have removed these rocks. Now, these blocks could have been put there from a crater that happened after the water flowed by. So again, there's the element of time in here, which the scientists are going to be trying to extract from their observations.
Jay Barbry, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like an explanation from you again. I know you've given it before, but maybe this is an appropriate time. How are these pictures, A, getting back to us, and B, being processed into a format where we recognize them as something?
Well, you know, I'm not that have the expertise to really explain it, but basically what it is you have these signals transmitted back by the high gain and antenna, and then they go into the computer, and the computer then recreates the signals that it has, and out comes the pictures. So it's like sending a picture to a certain extent over a wire here, or a fax sending, you get a picture of a fax coming in. You have these electronic signals, the data that comes in, and from that is formed the picture. So that's a simple way, and I'm sure it's a lot more details than that, but that's about as far as my expertise goes on it, John.
going to do it. And I think Alan Boyle here may have an explanation as well, Jay. He's our digit bit and bite guy. Alan, what do
He's
you
the
know
guy. I elect him.
Jay, you're the man, but I just wanted to add a couple of technical notes. First, even this high gain antenna sends stuff back at about 2,500 bits per second, which is pretty slow for terrestrial travel, but because it's such a faint signal coming from so far away, they want to make sure that they get the signal
over the bridge in this vicinity. Whether the whole column crossed, whether a brigade crossed or not, we just don't know. It's part of the fog of war for us in the news. We made the decision on what the avenue of approach is that the division or parts of the division will want to take.
And perhaps some of them went along the other way. You'll see the river there right in the middle, like that, and they might have split that column. Then there's some tactical reasons for that.
That's exactly right. I mean, you've got these are big divisions. There are several thousand vehicles in these columns, and as the terrain gets more restricted, you've got to have room to deploy, and that means you've got to take parallel routes. So you probably wouldn't keep the whole division on the west bank of the Euphrates, but you might keep some of it over there.
All right, one final point before we give it a rest on the big picture here, and that is the town of Najaf. Reports on Iraqi television that U.S. armor has made it as far as Najaf, about 95 miles from Baghdad. As we zoom in on Najaf, once again, not too far from the Euphrates River. That's pretty significant, and what that tells us is that perhaps these tanks are moving at record pace if they're in this part of the world, as close as 95 miles to Baghdad. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that when we're not hearing anything from those units, they're probably moving, and they're probably continuing to close in on Baghdad. I think it's clear that the key fight is going to be around Baghdad if there's a key fight. The resistance is going to stiffen if there's going to be resistance around Baghdad. And so the quicker we get there, the quicker we can put the full combat, combined arms potential of this force, air and ground, against the Iraqi Republican guards that are defending, and the quicker we break them and get it over with.
All right, so the road from Najaf to Baghdad undoubtedly is going to be a much more challenging road than the road from the Kuwaiti border to that location.
That's true, but again, Miles, in war, everything depends, and in this case, on the enemy.
All right. General Wesley Clark, always appreciate your insights. Thanks for giving us the big picture as it stands at this moment. Aaron.
Miles, thank you. General, you can come.
Since I think General Clark has done a very good job, obviously, of laying out kind of the United States side, let me add a few points on the Iraqi side, put my old intelligence analyst hat back on, and basically serve as General Clark's J2, his military assistant here. I think from as best we can tell, and as best anyone knows what Saddam Hussein's thinking, I think I can make 3 points in response to what General Clark's laid out for you about what's happened today. The first of which is that Saddam probably was at least mildly disappointed with what happened at Basra and Nasiriyah. Although it's clear that he never intended, as General Clark pointed out, to really make a stand at those 2 cities, he probably did hope that they would slow us down more than they did. He probably is somewhat disappointed that the Marines are able to skirt Basra and keep moving. He's probably a little bit annoyed that the U.S. was able to seize the bridge. Yep.
Ken, I'm going to stop you here. I promise I'll come back to you.
Not a problem?
No. Honestly, I will. I don't just say that. Jim Lacey from Time Magazine is on the phone, and we only have him for a brief bit. He was at Camp Pennsylvania, and indeed.
But they are not all going the same way. Sometimes one arrow will pause and wait for another arrow to flank around it. Each of those arrows is an American military unit, either the United States Marines or the United States Army 3rd Infantry Division. Sometimes they slow and stop while the other arrows pass them by, fold in front of them, fold in back of them. All of these arrows are flying. All of these U.S. Army and Marine Corps military arrows are flying toward Baghdad. That is what we are seeing. When resistance is encountered, one arrow will stop. There seems a determined policy on the part of the planners in the Pentagon and here in the command centers here that when resistance, Iraqi resistance, is encountered, one arrow will stop there, will not engage, that is, close force-on-force engagement. they'll stand back. The U.S. forces, the Army, in our case, the 3rd Squadron, 7th Cavalry, will fire an artillery barrage to protect the tanks and make sure that the tanks and the Bradley fighting vehicles do not come in immediate head-to-head contact with the Iraqi units which lie ahead. Now, we saw that yesterday. 7th Cavalry was moving north down this road behind me, north towards Baghdad. There were certain topographical features we can't go into at that point for security reasons, but the 7th Cav was moving down this road. They discovered an Iraqi unit ahead of us. They didn't know the size at the time. It turned out to be a rather large unit, battalion size. That unit put up resistance anytime the American reconnaissance helicopters flew close. They fired shoulder-fired missiles at the helicopters, and there were a few mortar shells fired in the direction of the 7th Cavalry. That being the case, the Army's standoff weapons, the big artillery, started shooting ahead. The net result of yesterday's engagement here, and it was more than a skirmish, is we believe that in a battalion-sized unit, we may be looking at upwards of 200 dead Iraqi soldiers over my shoulder, just a few miles in the distance. And by the way, the artillery keeps rumbling. There was a heavy bombardment last night, and while we've been on the air, I'm not sure you can hear it, but I can hear 155s in the distance. That is American artillery pounding that Iraqi unit, or the remnants of the Iraqi unit, softening the way for when the Pentagon and when the commanders here give the orders to go forward. But again, we're just one arrow flying at the bullseye Baghdad, and other units we've seen sweeping around us to the west. Other units we know are sweeping around us to the east. These arrows are constantly flying towards Baghdad. Presently, our arrow is in a pause position.
Okay.
Aaron?
Okay, Walter, here I'm gonna ask you to step aside a little bit, and we have been so we can see the men of this unit. We have spent, all of us here who have watched this from the comfort of Atlanta over the last several days, have spent a lot of hours with these guys. Maybe if you can widen out a little bit, if that's possible, we can get a better view. Walter, we see another storm stenciled onto that vehicle in front of you. What does that mean?
Another storm is actually just the name of the particular tank that you're looking at. Of course, it's an M1A1 Abrams. This tank happens to belong to Captain Clay Lyle. He's the commander of the Apache troop, that is Apache Company. But there are many tanks with names on them in the distance. There's one that looks like antique. I've seen other names painted on the tank's barrels. One name on one of the barrels was American Badass. They've got all sorts of names, some of which we can read on the air, others can't. But again, these are just names that the soldiers in the 7th Cavalry paint on the tanks to send a message to the Iraqis or whoever happens to be at the wrong end of their 120mm guns. Another storm presumably refers to another storm following Desert Storm. Go ahead, Aaron.
Let me ask you one other name. Who's been your photographer through the course of this?
Our photographer is Charlie Miller. He's a freelance photographer, a Scot, and I had CNN was very good to me. They said you can have whatever cameraman you want, and I picked Charlie. He and I did Afghanistan together.
Well, you picked well. Charlie, thank you very much for your hard work over the last several days. We've got many notes from people wanting us to thank both of you for the work that you have done. As you pan across, you see the kinds of conditions far more clearly, honestly, than the video phone could ever provide. This is a more standard kind of a camera and satellite that's a satellite dish that's sending these pictures back. When we first came up on these guys back 2 nights ago, there was nothing but brown. General, we saw nothing but that dirty desert sand. Now we see just behind them, and we started to see this yesterday, a little bit of green. So they've traveled some distance. Walt, you know how many miles? You'll say it to me in kilometers, won't you? You've traveled so far?
Yes. Yes, we've traveled about 150 miles. Actually, we've traveled
probably twice that distance, but because of feints and deceptive movements, the overall progress into southern Iraq is probably 100 to 150 miles. Again, we've traveled twice that distance because in the desert there's no such thing as a short distance between 2 points. By the way, we should also praise our engineer here, Jeff Barwise. He's the one that makes these pictures fly through the air. He's the one that's made the satellite phone work, as well as this satellite dish you're seeing the pictures from now. What you're looking at now, Aaron, by the way, is a line of vehicles of the 3rd Squadron, 7th Cavalry, a tank in the distance, and then yet another tank, and then there's the Bradley fighting vehicle, and then the Army's Civil Affairs unit, which is to contact the civilians once we get close to them. Aaron?
Walt, stand by. We're going to try and come back to you, but I'm going to lose one other feed, and I want to get to it first. Thank you, and thank Jeff and Charlie as well. Christian Amanpour is back in northern Kuwait. Christian has been traveling with British units who went into Qasr, as I recall earlier. It's good to see you back safe and well.
Aaron, the ground war in the southern eastern part of Iraq seems to be proceeding apace. Qasr, as far as we've heard, latest reports is that both the new port and the old port are secured, and overnight we have not had any reports of any of these pockets of resistance that we were seeing yesterday and over the past 24 hours. When we talked to US and British commanders there, because it was a joint operation, they told us that they fully expected to have that port and its small residential area under control by the end of yesterday, by the time night fell yesterday, and it appears that certainly overnight there have not been any major skirmishes, and indeed we're being told that they hope to bring in the beginning of humanitarian aid, at least some small bits of humanitarian aid, certainly within the next 24 to 48 hours. As for further north, up to Basra, US and British forces had moved on up north towards there. We have reports that the 51st Iraqi Army Division, which was considered the main defenders of that site outside of Baghdad, has been neutralized, not in terms of any specific conflict between the US and British forces and the Iraqis, but mostly in terms of capitulation, and as one British official quoted to us, they have melted away, the Iraqis. And we're being told that in Basra there is no sign of any resistance, although there is also no specific plan at this moment for any of the US or British forces to actually go into Basra in terms of having it as a military target. In fact, what's happening right now in the broader area here is that they have also consolidated the oil fields, the Rumaila oil fields, which are extremely vital. They produce 60% of Iraq's oil, and one of the key objectives at the beginning of this military campaign was to secure those vital economic and strategic targets. The oil fields, the oil terminals down on the Al-Faw Peninsula. We've heard much about the oil wells on fire. Although the pictures look dramatic because they're close in, the strategic significance of that overall is fairly minimal, because those oil wells are about 9 out of 500, and the wells themselves can be capped and the fires can be put out. What's difficult is when the gas and oil separation units are sabotaged, and that so far hasn't happened. And in fact, in about half an hour from now, we're going out there to see firsthand the status of the oil fields and those vital gas and oil nodes where the oil wells feed into. In terms of the broader picture down here, the British are now fully consolidating their control of the southeast. The US forces that were part of these British operations, in joint operations, are now
hold others to varies depending if you're in a court of law or in a war. And in a war, the kind of evidence that people are thinking about doesn't exist for the most part. You just don't get ground truth instantaneously in situations like that. We have reports from people who suggest that they were eyewitnesses to certain things, but we can't go out and double check them, and you can't talk to other people who had a different perspective, and therefore it's not possible to know for certain knowledge precisely what took place.
Is he, though, in control, as far as you can tell, of his military and of the regime?
Well, we'll know more the closer we get to Baghdad and Tikrit, one would think. But we hear reports that there seems to be some disarray in the Iraqi leadership. That's speculation. I would call it speculation. It's surmise. It's hard to say precisely. In these kinds of situations, we could be being tricked in some way. So these things will unfold. What we do know is that the outcome is certain, that if people want to save lives, they should surrender. We're telling them in multiple ways, through leaflets, through the radio, through television, through direct communication by telephone, how they can avoid being killed and how they can help their country and liberate their people. And they'd best do that, because it'll just take us longer, but it will still happen.
Could you tell us what the line of communication is between the U.S. and the Republican Guard in trying to encourage them to surrender?
It varies from unit to unit, and it tends to be in a variety of different ways, and I don't know that I'd want to get into the details.
But you can tell us it's ongoing, it's continuing right now.
That's correct. On a unit level.
Are you up on a unit-to-unit level, meaning U.S. military personnel or intelligence community personnel?
It varies, but it is at the unit level. It is not at a senior Iraqi armed services or regime level. There aren't any kind of negotiations going on at the very top level. The discussions that take place relate to specific units, and we've had good success in a number of units surrendering, and that's made a lot of sense. People's lives have been saved.
There was a report here in the Gulf suggesting 3 top Iraqi leaders may have been killed in that initial airstrike. Tariq Aziz, the deputy prime minister, Ali al-Majid, so-called Chemical Ali, and Izzat Ibrahim. Do you have any evidence that any of those 3 may have been killed in that initial airstrike?
No, I don't.
Let's move on and talk about the airstrikes. As you know, they're meeting with widespread criticism. The pictures that were seen around the world showed huge explosions in Baghdad, and the airstrikes, of course, continue. How can you be so sure that innocent civilians are not dying in those airstrikes?
Wolf, I saw some of those images that were carried on television around the world, and no one could watch them and not just feel your heart break that people can be killed and that there can be some unintended loss of life. The fact, however, is that there was not an attack on Baghdad. There was an attack on the Iraqi regime, and it was as precise as ever before in the history of warfare. The care that went into the targeting is just breathtaking. And it is in the battle damage assessments, and the people from the ground that we talk to are telling us that to a great extent in Baghdad, people are going about their business because they are so impressed with the precision of those targeting and those bombs and those attacks that they feel that the coalition forces are doing it in as the best possible way. It looks like it's a bombing of a city, but it isn't. It is a bombing of military targets, very precisely, and regime targets. And the television image is belied by what's seen on the ground.
But we've spoken to journalists, Mr. Secretary, who were there, who heard the explosions, the thunder. They said the earth basically shook for them. They said it was a terrifying experience. There are some 5 million people who probably were terrified during that ordeal and continue to be terrified right now. The question is this the way to win over the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people?
Wolf, the Iraqi people are hostages to a vicious regime. They will be liberated. It's going to happen. The only way to do it, they tried diplomacy for 13 years. They tried economic sanctions. Neither worked. They tried limited military applications in the northern and southern no-fly zones. That didn't work. They tried 17 UN resolutions. President Bush went one extra step and provided 48 hours for the Iraqi regime to leave the country and leave it without a conflict. Every single effort was rebutted, rejected. Now, that leaves only one course. You say, is there any way to do it without conflict? No, everything else was tried. And the Iraqi people are going to end up liberated. The ones that have been liberated in the southern part of this country are grateful and appreciative. And that will be the case as Baghdad is liberated.
But there are plenty of people out there, counterterrorism experts, who've already expressed fear that the images of this bombing, the shock and awe campaign, will merely foment terrorism, create new recruits for Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to go after American targets.
Wolf, I know there's lots of so-called experts opining on this and that. The fact is that the terrorists did not need any provocation. They attacked the United States of America on September 11th, viciously killed 3,000 innocent men, women, and children of every religion, of every nationality across the globe. That was not a response to an attack on Baghdad. It was an unprovoked attack. They are raising money. They are training people. We stopped them in Afghanistan. We tore up their terrorist training camps. We drove them out of that country. And in that country now there's a government that's representative of the Afghan people. And that is what's going to happen in Iraq. And the idea that this is provocative is wrong. Weakness is provocative. It entices people to do things they otherwise wouldn't do. And war is everybody's last choice. No rational person wants war. President Bush doesn't. The American people don't.
General Meyer said the other day that the war was moving on all fronts in the south, in the west, and in the northern part of Iraq. Let's go through a few specific details. In the south, I assume Qasr, the key port in the south, has been captured and secure. What about Basra and Nasiriyah?
I don't use the word secure, and the reason I don't on the port is because nothing's perfect. There's no question but that the coalition forces have occupied the port area. They're now in the process of taking mines out of the water so that humanitarian assistance and medical supplies and food can come in through that port. But I suspect that there will continue to be sporadic firefights from some dead-enders who don't want to give up. So I think that secure is probably somewhat of an overstatement. Basra is the same situation. The forces have moved in from the south. Most of the resistance has ended in the Basra area, but there'll, I would suspect, continue to be some dead-enders who will continue to fire at coalition forces. The oil wells in the south have been secured, quote unquote, but there again, there could be some untidiness as we go forward. And British forces are now occupying the bulk of those, that area where the oil wells are, and it's important that they be saved for the Iraqi people. There are about 10 wells that are burning, and we have people coming in the next 48 hours who will begin to put those fires out. As forces move north, there will be conflict and firefights, but we won't know whether the resistance, once we get closer to Baghdad, will be different from what we've experienced in the south, but I think it's reasonable to expect that it might be much more fierce.
And in Nasiriyah, is that yet under coalition control?
The forces are clearly in that area, and I'll leave it to General Franks and his terrific team of people to characterize the progress that's being made by coalition forces.
Let's talk about Western Iraq for a moment. Can people in Israel sleep easier tonight because U.S. forces are in control of that so-called H-2 and H-3 airfield from which so many Scuds, 39 Scuds to be specific, were launched against Israel during the first Gulf War?
Well, there's no question but that is the area where the ballistic missiles were launched last time, and they put at risk neighboring countries as well as Israel. We have a lot of special operators ranging across that generally vacant area, unpopulated area, and we feel pretty good about the fact that we've covered a lot of that ground. I wouldn't want to say that it's absolutely certain, that something couldn't be fired from that area, but given the overhead control we have, the air superiority, indeed air dominance in that part of the country, and the number of people on the ground, I think that we can feel much better today than yesterday or the day before with respect to that issue.
Mr. Secretary, I know your time is limited. Before I let you go, very briefly on the north, Turkey, there are conflicting reports whether Turkish forces have indeed moved across the line into northern Iraq or not. Have Turkish forces gone into northern Iraq, and does the United States want them to be there?
I've been hearing reports from the press almost every 4 hours for the past 3 or 4 or 5 days, reporting or alleging or speculating that Turkish forces have moved into northern Iraq in force. I can say two things about that. We have no intelligence evidence that suggests that's true. Second, the Turkish forces tell us repeatedly that it is not true. I believe them. In the event that we find that not to be the case, why, obviously that would be unfortunate.
Are U.S. warplanes flying over Turkish airspace now as they go on bombing runs towards Iraq?
U.S. coalition aircraft are flying over all of Iraq. There's no question about it. They're covering every inch of that country.
And the shock and awe campaign